Oleksandr Musiienko from the Territorial Defense Forces and a military analyst joins us live. Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello to you. Good evening.
What Oleksandr Syrskyi is talking about and what we're seeing on the front lines, specifically in southern Ukraine, the Oleksandrivka direction, the Hoyaypol direction, can we already consider this a certain trend of advancement by the Ukrainian military? What has recently been called counterattacks?
Well, the fact that definitely stands out as a trend is that, as you remember, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, General Syrskyi, has repeatedly emphasized that our defense must be active, and it is indeed active. As soon as opportunities arise, we carry out counteractions, counteroffensive operations that yield results, particularly, as we can see now, directly in the south, in the Oleksandrivka direction. And not only that, because I can tell you that our units at the tactical and local level, perhaps in smaller numbers compared to the enemy's offensive actions, but still they are carrying out their tasks, including counteroffensive actions, in order to prevent the enemy from advancing and to inflict maximum losses on them. As of today, we can state that as a result of these successful counteroffensive actions, which, by the way, are still ongoing despite everything, we are now seeing and recording that the enemy has brought in reinforcements for its troops, redeployed certain units from the Pokrovsk direction, and is bringing in some units from Russian territory that were there for combat recovery. But our actions continue, and their goal is to prevent the enemy from advancing deeper into the Zaporizhia region, which would pose a threat to Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk. So, as we have already discussed in our previous reports, we see that this direction is now unquestionably one of the enemy's most critical strategic priorities for conducting offensive operations. It is very important for us not to allow the front to expand, not to let the enemy get behind Ukrainian defenders, and not to let them occupy more of our territory or spread their offensive toward Dnipropetrovsk and the Zaporizhia direction. That's why such counteractions continue whenever there's an opportunity or likelihood to do so. And look, as a result of these actions, not only have settlements and territories been liberated, which is very important and a positive outcome, but there's more to it as well. In addition, it was possible to successfully pin down and contain the enemy in Pokrovsk, where they suffered significant and heavy casualties and failed to capture Pokrovsk within the time frame they had originally anticipated. In other words, the aggressors' plans here were thwarted. But even now, after they got bogged down there in heavy fighting and suffered losses, they've had to slow down somewhat in the Pokrovsk direction and shift their focus to the Oleksandrivka area, because they needed to salvage a situation that clearly wasn't going according to the plans of the Russian command and staff. And in this way, we managed to liberate certain territories, improve the tactical position of our troops, and also slow down the enemy's advance in the Pokrovsk direction. But it's clear that Russian forces will try to regain their position, at least tactically. They will also try to actively execute and implement their own offensive actions. That's why our units are now concentrating all their efforts on holding their current positions and essentially, from a defensive stance, effectively preventing the enemy from launching an attack.
By the way, you mentioned liberation and counteroffensive. Oleksandr Syrskyi also points out that, for the first time since 2024, the armed forces of Ukraine have repelled more attacks in a month than territory has been captured. And that is a huge step forward. I just want to highlight this because it depends both on the strength of our army and on how much weaponry we have. And what does this say about the Russian army, aside from the fact that there are certain regroupings? Does this mean they're getting weaker? Or is it, once again, just a period they want to wait out to recruit more people and then launch another offensive? Or is this more of a victory for us?
Well, I would say that this is still more the result and success of our actions. Still, there is a noticeable weakening of Russian units in various specific sectors of the front, of course. It's only natural because they're sustaining significant casualties. The losses keep increasing. We are fighting back, not allowing the enemy to achieve their objectives. And of course, to some extent, this leads to including demoralization in some military units and an increase in lying within the headquarters. By the way, there was also lying on the Russian side regarding the Oleksandrivka direction and Huliaipol, and that was exposed as well. And all of this leads to the fact that, of course, there are certain areas where the enemy is weaker, but still, this is mostly the result of the actions of the armed forces of Ukraine. Successful actions, proper organization of planning, assessment of the situation on the battlefield, and understanding how to act in order to continue our defensive operation under difficult conditions. Well, after all, we're already into the 5th year of the full-scale war. The war is incredibly vast in its scale, and we fully recognize and understand who we're fighting against, the sheer level of aggressiveness of our enemy, and so on. Therefore, of course, it is not easy, but in these conditions, it is actually possible to remain calm, to maintain the correct assessment of the situation, the train of thought, and as a result, to lead to the correct planning and organization of further actions. And this leads to the results we see.
Let's change the topic a bit now, although, of course, we are also talking about confrontation, about the military component. President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, had a telephone conversation with his Turkish counterpart, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The conversation focused on the situation around Iran. The head of our state noted that Ukraine is ready to share its experience in order to prevent the war from spreading.
Well, for the second time this week, an Iranian missile entered Turkish territory. It was intercepted by NATO air defense systems. The scattered debris fell near the city of Gaziantep in Turkey. There were no casualties. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan called the incident provocative and warned that such actions could harm relations between Ankara and Tehran.
Look, what relationship can Ankara and Tehran really have right now, considering Ankara is still part of NATO? Ankara has other allies too. Yes, in its own interest too, no doubt about it. But at the same time, this rhetoric about the relationship between the two capitals, how much does it actually reflect reality?
Well, first of all, I think when we talk about the military aspect, it would probably be interesting to hear the reaction of NATO itself, the North Atlantic Alliance, because the missiles were flying toward a NATO member, ballistic missiles. And you see, these are very important things. Why am I emphasizing this? Because just like that, Russia is actually attacking NATO countries, and we've seen Russian drones in Poland. And back then, maybe someone said it was some kind of provocation and so on. Yes, now Iran is testing NATO's resilience. I think these things aren't accidental either, honestly. These are things that are being done deliberately in a certain way, because both Russia and Iran have common goals, common objectives, to show a lack of unity among the allies, to split NATO, to divide the West, and that's what they're working on. And maybe they'll keep working on it going forward. And that's where the problem lies. In my opinion, NATO as a military political organization is showing an insufficient response to such actions, because these are, without a doubt, aggressive actions. You can say as much as you want that it's a coincidence, that it's provocative. We can clearly see that Iran has chosen the tactic of spreading the war as much as possible throughout the Middle East. This is their deliberate strategy. This is pressure on the whole world. Obviously, with rising energy prices, with the increase in the price of oil and gas, and with provoking an economic crisis in Europe and Asia. As a result, they think this will put pressure on the United States and that the fighting will stop. And they are definitely spreading these hostilities to Middle Eastern countries. And now, as we can see, to Turkey as well. There have also been incidents involving Azerbaijan. In other words, to the maximum extent possible. And of course, this must be met with a decisive response. Of course, official Ankara has its own position, but it's still interesting to know what the North Atlantic Alliance's point of view is here. Although we understand that NATO is not united when it comes to supporting a military operation against Iran, the positions of the countries there differ.
But NATO is also, in fact, taking certain actions right now. For example, launching the cold response exercises in the Arctic. The maneuvers will last until March 19th and are aimed at strengthening defense. Special attention is being paid to the role of civilians in supporting the military and to the readiness of hospitals and emergency services to respond to a large number of wounded in the event of war. According to Reuters, about 25,000 troops from 14 countries are taking part in the exercises, including the United States and Denmark. Preparations are ongoing. Perhaps, Mr. Oleksandr, could you elaborate on exactly what the NATO member countries are preparing for, and whether this means that, well, the preparations and the fact that we need to be ready to repel an attack from many countries, we no longer know from which direction it might come?
What?
The preparations are for, right?
Well, the Arctic is also, among other things, about resources. No matter how you look at it, right now, this is coming to the forefront, and we've seen the situation with Greenland. The government of the United States of America, whose president publicly and explicitly stated that Greenland should, one way or another, become part of American territory. At first, there was even talk of a direct annexation, but now it is more about a formal treaty that could be signed to significantly increase the strategic American presence there. And NATO countries have joined in precisely to show that no one actually intends to oppose the interests of the alliance or transatlantic unity in the region, that everyone is interested in protecting the Arctic, because the Arctic isn't just about the United States. There are other Arctic nations like Canada, Denmark, Finland, and Norway. And that's why they're ready to cooperate together as well. Well, I think the best thing these exercises could demonstrate right now would be if, after the soldiers' training there, icebreakers and expeditions ready to explore oil and gas deposits came in. Against the backdrop of events in the Middle East, I think this would have a positive effect on prices, lowering them, and it would serve as a deterrent to Russia, because these exercises are aimed at deterring Russia. If the US, together with the Europeans, were to demonstrate right now that they are ready, including to work on the shelf if necessary, even in the Arctic Ocean or the Northern Seas, and showed that they have real interest and capabilities, this would seriously undermine Putin's ambitions. He's already dreaming about coming onto the scene there and selling oil and gas left and right. And this would show the whole world that the West is united and that the West can work together, including on solving global issues that are currently pressing and that concern both Europe and Asia.
Thanks for the conversation and your time. Joining us was Oleksandr Musiienko, a Territorial Defense Forces serviceman and military analyst, live.